yet gone to lunch. I'm feeling very welcome in this conference, and I'm happy to give my input now in this very interdisciplinary setting. My name is Peter Viertbauer. I'm from the University of Innsbruck, and I'm a linguist by training, but what I'm actually going to talk about today does not have to do much with language in the narrow sense. It is very much tilted towards neurophysiology and semiotics then. So I will have to explain how I even got there and how I dare do that. So the problem that puzzled me most in linguistics was always the reference problem and the infinite meaning of language that we can transfer. So the form might be infinite, might be not. I'm not getting into that discussion. But anyways, we can transfer infinitely many meanings. And most of all, we can and should transfer meanings that are not known to the listener. So far, so well known. So I was thinking, where is this infinite meaning? Because it cannot be in the brain, and it is, in my opinion, also not in the code of the language. So trying to come up with some binding for the meaning. I called it Let's Dig Meaning because that's where I think we can learn something about proto-language, and I arrived at that line of attack towards proto-language through this questioning of the meaning of language. So what I'm first going to do is to present the broad idea, how or what I want to do methodologically in order to access the broad gulf between primatology on the one hand and modern language on the other side. For this, I'm going to introduce a very tentative stratigraphy of neural meaning, which is neurophysiology and neurophilosophy, and obviously cannot claim for it to be correct. And then I want to see how we can exploit such a model, and I say consciously such a model, in language evolution research. So, study of language evolution is language archaeology. That's an ideal, obviously, and it's not what we experience, because we've got nothing to dig in. That's something language doesn't fossilize, is what we hear a lot. And so we can have only indirect roots. So what I'm proposing is that meaning is in fact a material that we can dig in. And well, let's see how far I can get there. And if I had advanced further in my study of meaning, I could probably transfer my meaning to you easier, but let's try. So how can we dig meaning? I mean, I've got a fossil here. And a fossil, basically, what is it? It's a difference in material composition. I distinguish a fossil not necessarily by its shape. It can have any shape, we agree on that. But what is definite, it has to differ somehow from the surrounding. So if I can distinguish between different materials in language, in linguistic meaning, I might have a way of distinguishing in modern language certain materials that are building blocks of language. And language is a tool made of material. In this case, it was a cast iron, I think a big knife. So it is made out of meaning because the signal itself is a meaning that I interpret. And on the other side, it is made to transfer meaning to the listener, even though we do not know where that meaning is already in the listener. Okay, and tools have a history. In this case, that would be Bronze Age technology. So archaeology actually tries to construct a fiction on different technological innovations. And each fossil or each archaeological find, you actually classify through your fiction. And in the optimal terms, obviously, we get to have such a thing in language evolution, because then we can distinguish different innovations, and that could further our cause. So far, there's been a lot of dreaming, so now let's get a little bit into the conception of language and why I think we can actually apply such a thing as archaeology to linguistic meaning. This is a microchip, obviously, and I put above it that modern languages are like software. In a sense, I think modern language has become independent of the carrying material. So you can basically run a program on many different architectures, and that's basically what we see around in the world. And that's why the historical study of, the reconstructive study of language, in my opinion, just leads to a history of software. There is another stage in technological history where actually we're still bound by the material. People from the Bronze Age could have probably interpreted this object even though the material was unknown to them. So here it is more, each evolutionary step is more about the processing of the material that we're working with. So if I can come up with a fiction of the processing of meaning in a way as you have a fiction of the processing of materials in archaeology, that I could then falsify in modern language. So obviously that begs the question, what is meaning? And I think everyone has very strong opinions about it. So as a working definition, I take an outside stance, which agrees with my reading of Wittgenstein, basically, which I hope we can avoid the discussion of because I don't think that would be very fruitful. So to say from an outside perspective of meaning, a relation between two entities is a meaning. That borders very close to the definition of information in itself, as Friend of Weaver, the smallest difference that makes a difference. But yes, we can more or less forget about this because what I'm really concerned with in this talk is the meaning in the brain. So what Wittgenstein did, in my humble opinion, was, or what philosophy does, is try to bind language with the world directly. And commented himself, the Tractatus, that was a failed attempt in his opinion, or the wrong question asked. But I don't think he abandoned principally the connections between the different concepts that he's using. So what I am trying to do is basically apply a philosophy of meaning to the brain, to neuronal meaning. And this has advantages. First of all, I don't need to care if what the brain perceives about the world is correct, which is a big problem in philosophy. I just want to describe with the tools that I've got from the outside perspective of philosophy, I want to describe what's going on in the brain. So I'm describing the brain in philosophical terms. Exactly. So obviously, what I try to do is get a system into neuronal meaning. It's not necessarily my choice. That's where I arrived by asking more and more questions and not knowing when to stop. And when I did this, thinking about neural meaning, I obviously started as a linguist from a very naive assumption. The naive assumption is that a neuron has a meaning in itself. And, well, I couldn't find any. A neuron alone, without anything attached to it, is basically a very nice cell. It might have a nice shape. But there is no meaning anywhere to be found. So obviously I got to look at the network of neurons, applying that, and in that network, the neuron becomes meaningful. And my definition of a neuron then is that it is a continuum of processes and meanings. It's not one process. Obviously, basically all neurons do just the same. There is a neuronal spike that they emit under certain circumstances, but this is a continuum. The circumstances that apply for a neuron to emit the spike, they are continuous. All right, so a little bit more concrete after this only philosophical babbling. So now I'm going into comparative biology, also not really my field, and just trying to say, okay, which factors actually influence the meaning of a neuron. So when I talk about levels here, and I'm going to talk about levels, it's not going to be, shouldn't be understood as necessarily that each neuron pertains to one level and one level alone. Sorry, the neuron, but it's not. Well, talk myself into something here. So, a level, in this sense, is an abstraction out of the network. And obviously, you could probably make infinitely many levels. What I'm talking about here is abstractions from the network where actually the neuronal meaning, in my opinion, greatly differs from the meaning on a previous stage. So what we've got here is a Kump jelly, very simple mythozoan. There's a timeline to them. What they've got is nerve nets with a simpler neuropharmacology. So basically, they react on a certain perception with an action. They've got muscles. I'm not sure if they got glands. So from the outside, they perceive something with a receptor cell, and that might either go directly to a motor neuron, which would be like a reflex that we've got still, a kneecap reflex would be an example, or it can go through interneurons, and so this first interneuron that they have in a nerve net, otherwise it wouldn't be a network, I just call the motoric level for here now. And so the information gets processed by the cells in the motoric level. They are not just receptor cells to the motor, but to the motor neurons, they are just like receptor cells. So they are basically another representation of the outside world, which has gone through the processing. So another step would be the parahoxozoa, in my opinion, which is founded on more than just a simple cladistics, which obviously is to be taken with a lot of salt, because that doesn't mean that the Hydra, as we see here, hasn't evolved anything for the last 600 million years. So the only thing I want to demonstrate is the innovation that they have, and a very important innovation, because they still got nerve nets, is that they've got inhibitory neurons. So with the inhibitory neurons, they can do a little bit more fanciful things, and these fanciful things, they depend basically on a more complex perception. So behavioral complexity is a result of perceptual complexity in the first place, because there is no point on making a dance move just because some light reaches my eye. There needs to be a situation perceived that I can actually react to. So this level, and I put now words here, also these words, they are not meant to be perfect definitions of what this level is for. We will later see how they apply also to human brains. So they are just for us to grasp a little bit what it's about. Thank you. So we get contrasts, which come not only from a single receptor cell, but they come through a receptor cell and then inhibitory neurons, but I'm not going to get into detail. And we can get regularities from that. So what I put here is retinal bilateral cells. I'm going to skip a long explanation now in order to advance. So now we've got a nematode, which is a bilateral animal, and I postulate, obviously it's a postulate, that this is a more advanced level yet. So if you see here regularities in shape, and you see the nematode, and you see the nematode doesn't have eyes, of course, this is the abstraction. I just say that we have reached another level of perceptual complexity that allows for more complex reactions to the environment. Well, I'm going a little bit quicker through it. I'm not sure how much interest is actually there in all the details of all the levels. And for the Protolang conference, I think the more important part is the semiotic part that's going to follow later. So getting another level in chordates, and then yet another step in short vertebrates. We get to amniotes, who have a cortex, even though they don't have a neocortex. And then on another level, we've got mammals. I mean, we belong to all of those groups, I have to say, or you're probably aware. So we also pertain to the group of primates. And now I ran out of space in the diagram, that's why I couldn't make a new stage for humans. No, my opinion is actually that there is no qualitative difference in the complexity of perception between primates and humans. No qualitative difference. Obviously, there is a difference in the exact usage of that complexity and also in the quantity of neurons. So I've got this very raw model that I didn't introduce anything close to how much I wanted to introduce it. So you would all say, all right, nice theory, but is there any good, any benefit from it? And now I'm trying to get to that. And in semiotics, still in deep water, when we look at the general model of communication, and that's the first thing I want to introduce here, is how would I communicate through this perceptual complexity? Obviously, I need to communicate with my conspecific. We have to communicate with them somehow. And I have to use something of those things that they can perceive. So let's say I'm a primate and I want to communicate my character, which will influence the behavior greatly because that's the top, the social level. So obviously the character that I'm experiencing will influence my behavior towards a certain person. So what I can do is not communicate my character directly, but I actually need to be a person who does something. Let's say regular grooming, as an example. So I am, in the terms of person, I'm an icon to my conspecific. So the character is perceived through the kind of person that I am. And we could say, comparatively, between different persons that I know, I can estimate the character. If I only know, excuse me, well, no, I'm not going to use an expletive here, I'm thinking videotape. But if I only know bad people, the character of a less bad person is going to look rather nice to me. So we need this comparison. So through the interactions, we get bonding and we get better behavior towards us. And in that theory, that was important to primates. So what would be a next step? If I adhere to that model, I would probably go down one step. So I have been on this level, just one level below the highest level which I cannot communicate. So now I say I want to communicate more different things, or it is just, and that's what Dunbar said, it is just too expensive to communicate in this way with everyone all the time. So what else can I do? I can give them certain information, and I could do this through not being only a person, but being an actor in this sense. I didn't say it because I was obviously slower than I expected, that not a single neuron represents an actor, but this is the effect of the whole level, the whole bunch of neurons on that level that represent an actor. So if I perceive someone who does something in the strict sense, so I say there that's an actor, and that's what a gesture basically is. A gesture is someone who is actively doing something consciously. There's certainly some kind of theory of mind involved, but not even very much, because that's already in our perceptual complexity. So if I stay with the terminology of Peirce and Deacon reference that would be indices, it's dually indirect. But the problem is, if I want to go down even one further step, that would mean I would need to be a subject then. And subject is not what it is generally in linguistics. A subject is a moving object, but not moving by itself in this terminology. So how can I, as a person, which is perceived as a person, how can I be just a moving object today? That would be an abstraction. We see it in sign language, but I don't think it is actually a path we can go down in language evolution. So that's why I think that early vocal language has a higher chance of depicting what actually happened in language evolution. So a signal, in my opinion, is also on the episodic level, probably some kind of prosodical features would be involved, and it's a double indirect act. So I can communicate, as I did before, imperative meaning. With gestures, with signals, it's a pretty imperative meaning. And the signals, if I have a complex inner structure, but which is holophrastic, have the advantage as a vocal signal that I can further and further analyze them into smaller parts. And that's what I think, rather than a combination of elements in proto-language happened, it's an analysis of holophrastic structures. So I'm very sympathetic with Deacon's postulate of symbolic revolution, and in this theory that would be going down to the subject level, which is a triple indirect speech act, which in turn then makes available a whole level for reference. It is, or it would be, an internally analyzed vocal signal. And what would be the new thing that I could communicate if I look at this perceptual complexity would be something like verbal meaning, let's say. And I don't think that any primate or any hominid ever said that I do whatever. It's just as a conceptual stage where I can, with a symbol, I can transfer verbal meaning. And this is something that's probably going to, or could be hotly debated. I say this didn't happen, as Deacon says, very late in language evolution, but I think as it's not a big step, look, it is a big step, but it's not out of the blue. It would have happened very early in human evolution. For which argument, if something like this is correct, and I couldn't argue that, I think I misestimated time quite a lot. If this is correct, and we want to talk about everything in the world, including shapes, including regularities, or the outside world. We need to get from up there to down there, and we've got different stages to handle. With the same brain that we already have. Thank you. I need time for that. And the symbolic revolution just on the onset of human language is too late to give us time to get through those levels that I here postulate and obviously matter to discussion. So that's what I call the symbolic shortfall. And now, in further evolution, that's what I say. If I get vocal speech act, they can get analyzed further, and now subject, object are obviously visual terms. There would be equivalents on the vocal side, and I can analyze this vocal signal into more and more detail, and that would give me the possibility to talk about a new conceptual meaning space. That would explain the stages in the evolution of the brain, which I think was driven by language. If you look at different intracranial volumes and how they developed, I don't think it's a linear process. And yeah, the other conclusion would be that modern languages, and that's where I wanted to get with the software, they actually create an outside to the perception, to the perceptual complexity. So whatever we do, and I think I have to go to conclusions, but whatever we do is we modulate actually the upper levels, because those upper levels, they depend on the lower levels. So if I get a lower level signal, that would modulate, and I think through inhibition, but that's a whole different thing, they would modulate actually how I perceive, or which actors or which persons or which characters I perceive. Yeah, I think I have gone through all of my bold and unsubstantiated claims, and I'm happy to open the fire now.
Do you have any questions for Peter?